Animal Farm. A bunch of farm animals rise up against their human owner, kick him out, and decide to run the place themselves. Except it turns into a totalitarian dictatorship where the pigs become the new bosses, rewrite the rules whenever they feel like it, and casually rewrite history. Animal Farm by George Orwell came out in 1945, and it's not exactly subtle. It's a straight-up allegory for the Russian Revolution and the rise of Stalin. The humans represent the old ruling class, the pigs represent the revolutionary leaders who become corrupt, and the sheep, well, they're the people who believe anything they're told if you chant it enough times. The famous line, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others, which is basically the nicest way anyone's ever said, we're all screwed, but some of us are screwed slightly less. So why was it banned? In the Soviet Union, obviously, because it was a direct roast of their government. It was also banned or challenged in Western countries at different points, because during World War II, Britain didn't want to upset their Soviet allies. Even in the US, it's been pulled from school shelves for being politically offensive, and, at one point, for having talking animals, which some thought was inappropriate for kids. Yes, apparently the issue wasn't the totalitarianism, it was the fact that a horse could form political opinions. The real genius of Animal Farm is that it works on two levels. If you read it as a kid, it's a quirky story about animals. Read it as an adult, it's a disturbingly accurate reminder that revolutions can end up looking a lot like the thing they tried to replace. And that's why this little farmyard fable has been making governments sweat for nearly 80 years. Invisible Man. First off, this is not the sci-fi novel where a scientist turns invisible and robs banks. This one's Ralph Ellison's 1952 classic, and trust me, it's much more terrifying because it's real life.
Okay, how many books are called Invisible Man?
Invisible Man here is an unnamed black narrator living in mid-20th century America who isn't literally invisible. Society just refuses to actually see him as a person. He spends the book bouncing from one environment to another, trying to find where he fits, only to realize every system he enters wants to use him as a tool for their own agenda. And if that sounds depressing, it's because it is.
So they don't see him as a human, just a tool that they could manipulate. But that doesn't actually apply just to blacks. It can also apply to almost anybody. Because the thing is that if you have a bunch of money and you need somebody to work in your company, just go to some random guy on the street, and then you say that, listen, I'll pay you this amount to come and work for me. Come on now. And then the guy says he's broke because go say yes, not knowing that the guy that hired you basically doesn't really care much of you, just cares about what you can do for him. That's basically how a lot of things in society works. It's depressing, but that's true.
But it's also brutally honest. Ellison takes you through the narrator's life like you're living inside his skin, feeling the way racism strips away his identity until he's just a concept to people. So why did it get banned? Well, first, racism. Not in the sense that the book is racist, but because it deals with it so directly and with uncomfortable honesty that a lot of school boards in the US decided students weren't ready for it. Which is basically code for, we don't want to talk about this because it makes us feel bad. In 2013, a North Carolina county actually banned it after parents complained it was too obscene for teenagers. Which, given that it's about systemic oppression, is like saying a fire extinguisher is too wet to be useful. Ellison's writing style is dense, layered, and sometimes surreal. You get dreamlike sequences, intense symbolism, and moments where you're not sure if what's happening is literal or metaphorical. And that's exactly why it's genius. The message.
When society... That when you can't tell whether it's a metaphor or something that is supposed to be literal. I just like reading or experiencing stories that make you ask questions. Something like someone like AOT. It keeps all of us guessing and questioning our morals. Like, was Aaron right or was he wrong? It is a debate that we are going to argue with it for the rest of time.
Refuses to see you, you have to define yourself on your own terms, even if that means living underground. It's a mirror that forces you to confront the stuff most people pretend isn't there. Slaughterhouse-Five, the war novel that broke the rules. Imagine a war story that isn't really a war story. It's also a time travel story, and a sci-fi alien abduction story, and a philosophical meditation on fate and death. That's Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, published in 1969 and banned almost immediately in multiple places. The plot follows Billy Pilgrim, a completely average, slightly clueless American soldier who gets captured during World War II and survives the firebombing of Dresden, one of the most devastating and least talked about Allied attacks. But here's the twist. Billy experiences his life completely out of order. One moment he's in a German prison camp. Next moment he's back home years later. Then, suddenly, he's naked in a glass zoo on an alien planet called Tralfamador, being displayed like a goldfish to creatures who see all of time at once. It sounds ridiculous, and it is, but Vonnegut uses that absurdity to make the most devastating points about war, trauma, and how humans cope with things they can't change. The aliens have a philosophy. Every moment has always existed and always will. When someone dies, they just shrug and say, "So it goes." That phrase appears over 100 times in the book, turning into this weird dark mantra for dealing with death.
Wait. So basically, bro has a kind of disorder where he starts seeing, like at one point, he's in one place, and another point he's at another place. Then at another point, he's speaking with the alien guys that are basically telling him that, well, yes, everything's.
It's been banned for profanity, for sexual content, for undermining patriotism, for portraying soldiers as flawed human beings instead of squeaky clean heroes. Basically, for not being a war propaganda poster. In 1973, one school board in North Dakota literally had copies burned in a furnace, because apparently the lesson from a book about the horrors of mass destruction was, let's destroy more things. But here's the genius. Vonnegut wasn't just telling a story, he was using chaos, humor, and sci-fi to sneak in some of the most hard-hitting anti-war commentary ever written. And it works because you're laughing at one page, and then 2 sentences later you feel like you've been punched in the chest. If Animal Farm was banned because it made government sweat, Slaughterhouse-Five was banned because it made people ask, wait, why do we glorify war in the first place? Alright, let's wade straight into the most infamous, most absolutely do not read this at a family picnic book on your list. The 120 Days of Sodom. Some books are banned because they challenge authority. Some because they have bad words. And then there's the 120 Days of Sodom banned because, well, it's basically the human race's worst possible Google search history turned into 377 pages. Written in 1785 by Donatien Alphonse François, better known as the Marquis de Sade, whose name literally gave us the word sadism. This book is so extreme that even reading a summary feels like it should come with a shower and possibly a court-appointed therapist. Here's the premise. 4 insanely wealthy libertines lock themselves away in a remote castle with dozens of victims, and over the course of 120 days, they act out every depraved, cruel, and violent act imaginable. It's not implied depravity. It's described in meticulous, unflinching detail. De Sade wrote it while imprisoned in the Bastille on a scroll so long it could wrap around your living room and claimed it was the most impure tale ever told. Spoiler, he was correct. Why was it banned? That's like asking why you shouldn't bring a chainsaw into a daycare. It's been censored and outlawed almost everywhere since it was written. Not just for sexual content, but for extreme violence, blasphemy, and basically ticking every box on the human indecency checklist. And yet, here's the uncomfortable twist, it's also considered a weirdly important work in literary history. Some see it as a brutal critique of absolute power, showing how those with complete control and no accountability inevitably become monsters. Others think it's just the diary of a man with too much free time and no moral compass. It wasn't even published in full until 1904, more than a century after it was written, and even then, it was banned in countries from France to Australia. Today, it's technically legal in some places, but you'll still find it locked away in restricted access sections of libraries, right next to books on nuclear waste disposal. If the rest of this list makes you question authority, the 120 Days of Sodom makes you question the author. The 48 Laws of Power, The Manipulator's Playbook. Most self-help books tell you to be yourself and follow your dreams. The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene tells you, actually, manipulate everyone around you until you win. Published in 1998, this is basically a greatest hits collection of political cunning, military deception, and corporate ruthlessness, all boiled down into 48 easy-to-remember rules, like conceal your intention.
I'm not gonna lie, I've actually been guilty of reading this book. It can twist your head, I'm not gonna lie, in ways that you can't believe. There's also this book that was also written by Robert Greene after this, was called The Laws of Human Nature. After reading that book, I actually it became harder to start to continue seeing people as people and just units that are being either controlled or you can't control. It's yeah, the book. Yeah, I don't. I really question what was going through the guy's head when he wrote this. Seriously.
Crush your enemy totally. Discover each man's thumbscrew. This isn't a book about kindness, it's a book about winning, whether people like you or not. In several US prisons, wardens decided this book was too dangerous for inmates to read. They figured that giving convicted criminals a how-to guide for manipulation, deception, and overthrowing authority might not be the best idea for keeping a calm prison yard. And honestly, they're not wrong. The book doesn't pretend to be moral. Green flat out says these laws are used by both saints and psychopaths, and you can use them for good or evil. It's power. What you do with it is on you. Critics call it amoral, cynical, even borderline sociopathic. Fans call it the ultimate reality check. And both sides are kind of right.
That is true.
If Animal Farm warned you about people abusing power, the 48 Laws of Power hands you the blueprint for doing it yourself. Once you read it, you start noticing these laws everywhere. In political speeches, in late-night call with your ex, and even in family arguments. It's not about whether people use power this way. It's about realizing they already do. The Satanic Verses. The novel that sparked a fatwa. In 1988, Salman Rushdie published The Satanic Verses, a sprawling magical realist novel about immigration, identity, religion, and the blurred line between dreams and reality. It's a complex, surreal story, but the controversy zeroed in on specific dream sequences that loosely reimagine parts of Islamic history. One storyline includes a prophet figure that resembles the Prophet Muhammad, portrayed in a way many Muslims found deeply offensive. The title itself comes from a disputed historical story, the so-called Satanic Verses incident, where verses allegedly revealed to Muhammad were later declared to be from the devil, not God. Scholars debate whether it ever happened, but to many, even fictionalizing it was crossing a sacred line. The backlash was immediate and global. Some countries banned the book outright. Bookstores in the UK and US were firebombed. And in 1989, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa, a religious ruling calling for Rushdie's death. Not a bad review, not a boycott. A literal death sentence. Rushdie went into
Why am I not surprised that is the people of Iran? Like, I am not surprised at all that it is Iran. Like, at all.
hiding for years under British police protection, moving constantly and living under fake names. Translators and publishers associated with the book were attacked, some even killed. Rushdie said the book is about cultural hybrids, how migrants mix old identities with new ones, how myths and memories blur together. But once religious outrage took over the conversation, the literary discussion got buried under political and theological conflict. Even people who defend the right to publish the Satanic Verses often admit it's not an easy read. It's dense, symbolic, and filled with surreal shifts, but its ban became one of the biggest free speech debates of the 20th century. Today, in some countries, owning it can still land you in trouble. Lolita. Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita, published in 1955, might be the most uncomfortable book to recommend to someone. You can't just say, oh yeah, it's about a middle-aged man obsessed with a 12-year-old girl, but it's really good, without sounding like you need to be put on a list. The narrator, Humbert, tells the story in the first person, his version of events. And that's the key. You're inside his head the entire time. He's intelligent, witty, and charming in his language, but his actions are predatory and unforgivable. That's what makes the book so unsettling. It's an unreliable narrator at maximum power. Nabokov uses beautiful prose and wordplay to trap you in Humbert's worldview, and you start realizing how easily language can manipulate perception. Humbert paints himself as a tragic romantic hero, but the truth seeps through in the details, and the horror is in what he doesn't emphasize. France banned it for 2 years, England banned it for 4, Argentina, New Zealand, South Africa all banned it for obscenity. Even in the US, it barely squeaked past censors. Critics were split between calling it filth and calling it genius. And here's the twist. Nabokov said the book isn't about sex, it's about obsession, manipulation, and self-deception. Humbert's love is just a mask for control. The novel is, in a way, a masterclass in showing how predators rewrite reality to excuse themselves. The Lorax. Published in 1971 by Dr. Seuss, The The Lorax looks like a harmless, colorful story about fluffy trees and a small orange creature with a giant mustache. And it is, until you realize it's basically a 45-page anti-deforestation manifesto. The plot's simple. A guy called the Onceler discovers the beautiful truffula trees, chops them down to make useless products called thneeds, and industrializes the whole area until there's nothing left but smog and sadness. The Lorax warns him over and over, but the Onceler ignores him until the last tree falls. It's a cautionary tale about greed, environmental destruction, and the consequences of ignoring sustainability disguised as a bedtime story. So, why was it banned? In 1989, a group of California loggers complained that the book portrayed the logging industry unfairly. They argued it brainwashed children into thinking all logging was bad, and some school districts actually pulled it from classrooms. Because apparently the real danger to kids wasn't pollution or deforestation, it was rhyming couplets about rhyming couplets. To balance things out, some schools started stocking a pro-logging children's book called The Truax, which is basically the Lorax but from the perspective of a logging executive trying to explain why clear-cutting forests is actually fine, kids. The funny part, Dr. Seuss based the Lorax on the real-world destruction of forests in Kenya, not California, but the shoe fit and the logging industry got mad anyway. Today, the Lorax is still one of the most famous environmental children's books ever, and if you reread it as an adult, it feels less like a story and more like a warning label we all ignored.
That was an interesting story.
A, B, C, D, alphabet T, the singles.